new subject. I have been involved in the beginning, in the formation of the courses at Gujarat Forensic Science University. You may be knowing GFSU, which is very famous because they have done a lot of the work related to crime investigation, also very high profile cases they have dealt. So within the same campus, they also have this institute of the Gujarat Forensic Science Institute. So in the beginning, I have been involved in developing their curriculum on the forensic science in the area of civil engineering. So this is the good opportunity for me, and I'm really very happy to share some of the work, whatever I feel that you can bring under the umbrella of the forensic science or forensic analysis. So that is how the topic I have thought I have proposed today for my lecture. That is the forensic analysis of groundwater contamination from the industry. And let me tell you that I'm going to speak on this for another 2 hours as you have allotted me the time. But I would say to all the participants, you are free to interact anytime. I'll try to even keep some time at the later stage also, and to invite some of the questions from you, or to have some interactive session, with you, because I feel the two-way discussion will give you more, the impetus in the understanding, and also some kind of the more satisfaction. So you are free to, tell me to keep some pause, and then you can discuss whenever you feel so, because this is a training program and not a conference lecture. So don't think that I have to finish the first of our lecture, then only you can ask. You can ask later on also, but if you feel something to be clarified in the beginning or at the middle stage, you are most welcome. You can do so. Okay. So with this, again, I would like to thank the organizer, and Dr. Madhulisha for giving me this opportunity. And let me start now the lecture. So I'm going to share the slide now. Is it fine? I think I am audible to everybody.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to now share this slide. Yeah, please. Are you able to see this slide?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Then do it full screen. Yes. Yeah. Now it's fine, sir.
Yeah, this is fine. Okay. 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 So, as I said, I'm going to speak on the forensic analysis of groundwater contamination resulting from industry. So this is going to be the talk today. So let me start with the very first slide, which speaks of that why we need a forensic analysis. What do you mean here by the forensic analysis, and especially in terms of the groundwater contamination? In general, you may be knowing the forensic word is generally used, as I said, in the crime investigation. So those kind of the problems where they need to investigate some crime, murder, or some kind of the the manipulation of the digital data or the photograph or some kind of the CD. So all those kind of the applications that people go for the forensic, or they have a lot of the experimental investigation procedure for that. But this is something different in the civil engineering, and but the word comes from there itself. And in all, when we say the forensic, we basically mean here to really find out, to really examine that who is the main culprit behind this problem. So how you are going to trace the real reason for the problem whatever you are facing. So like in the structure, if there is some damage, then why the damage has occurred, why the cracks has occurred, what could be the reason behind this kind of the cracks, so the building has failed or the damage failed, so that kind of the investigation basically comes under the forensic. So here also, when we talk about the groundwater contamination, then we are basically interested to know that this groundwater contamination has resulted because of whom, because of what purpose, because of what activity. As you know, that the groundwater contamination can result from many the sources, and there could be many regions. It is not something one region that is going to be responsible, and that becomes a difficult job. So that is what you see in the first bullet, what I'm saying here, that the groundwater pollution can be defined as the naturally or artificially induced degradation of natural groundwater quality. So that means you have natural groundwater, and if you have any deviation from that natural groundwater quality because of any regions, there could be any region, and because of that, which could be artificial or which could be the natural, especially in the groundwater, somewhere you may see even the natural way of getting it contaminated. But certainly there are main sources, as you see, the industrial sources which cause the contamination. So that contamination which has resulted or which has caused the change in the groundwater quality significantly up to a level which makes the groundwater the non-potable, and that becomes an issue. And so it has to be the investigated that who has been the culprit for the groundwater contamination. So that is what the first bullet says. The second one, as you see, the groundwater pollution, when it takes place, what it happens, what it does. Certainly it impairs the use of water and can create hazards to the public health through toxicity or the spread of the disease. So once it has got contaminated, certainly it is no longer you can make use of for drinking purpose, or maybe for other purposes, and especially with reference to the public health, that can become toxic, especially if you are having the heavy metals in that. The point what we see, there are numerous sources and causes that can modify groundwater quality. So there is not only one source or one cause that you can pinpoint that this is the source and this has resulted because of this phenomenon. So you see in a real life, there are many sources, many happening could be the reason for modifying the groundwater quality. So if we say that, okay, if a particular industry is polluting, really that industry is polluting or not, that becomes a question mark, and that is where you need to investigate, just like as you do in the forensic analysis. So there we mean here the importance of the forensic analysis comes, that you have to come out with the proper scientific findings that this is the industry or this is the event which has caused the groundwater contamination. Out of the other sources, whatever is available, the polluting sources, you are able to successfully rule out the possibility of those factors, possibility of those sources that might have caused the contamination of this kind. And that is where it becomes important that how to investigate. In contrast, you see the last here, the second last bullet, in contrast with the surface water pollution, the subsurface or groundwater pollution is difficult to detect, so and even more difficult to control, and it may persist of decades. So So that what I mean to say that it is easy to find out whether the river is polluted or not, but it becomes difficult to know that whether groundwater is polluted or not. And when it has become polluted, it is going to be further difficult how to rehabilitate, how to decontaminate the groundwater, because you don't have any natural boundary like the rivers or canals. And it can persist for a long time. So that means it can be there for decades. And that is what is the important. And that's why it makes more significant. The next point, as you see here, the EIA, that is the environmental impact assessment, when we carry out for any project. So that is what something we call like pre-event or the pre-project, when the project is at the conceptualization stage. It doesn't exist in the field, but you are planning to have a project. It is something like, let us say, in a particular area, you want to install an industry. Now, there may be some pros and some cons about having a industry in a particular area. Some people may say that it is going to give you the benefit because it can generate the employment, it can generate the revenue. But some people may say no, it can contaminate our water system, maybe lakes, maybe the rivers nearby, or maybe the groundwater. So if so, or it may even contaminate the air, let us say. So there are some environmental problem. We may not allow a particular project in this. So that is something you have to make a decision, in the beginning itself. So that means the event has not taken place. The project is not occurring there. Project is not existing. It is just on a hypothetical plane, on a paper. It is just at the conceptualization or the planning stage. So if that time itself, if you foresee that there is a problem, you may not allow. But if you get the clearance that now you can allow that project to be executed there, then it question comes at the later stage, what is going to happen after some years? That is what we call post-event or the project, that what is going to happen there. And then if some pollution has taken place, then it starts with the blame game. That some people may say, no, it has happened because of this industry, because of that industry. Because when the development takes place, you'll be having multiple industry, you'll be having many other sources, maybe the municipal corporation will be there also because of the development. So everybody will start putting the finger on others that they are the culprit for the contamination. And it becomes a difficult task that who is the main, the contributor for the pollution, whose door should be closed, or to whom one should take this stringent action, or to bring to a stage where the pollution measures should be taken, control measures should be taken. So those are the questions which becomes the pertinent. And in the forensic analysis, we try to do or investigate or to find out the really this is the industry, or this is the event, or this is the reason why the contamination has taken place, by ruling out all other possible sources of the contamination, which can happen theoretically, but practically at the prevailing situation, they may not be responsible. And then that means you are making single out one or two the activity or one or two industry which are responsible for the contamination. So that is what we mean here. You have to do the forensic analysis for groundwater contamination. Okay, let's go to the next. If we go for this, the points come which is basically make this problem a big challenge, and that is what the wastewater generation is increasing many-fold, and managing wastewater is becoming a major challenge as a waste disposal is no longer an easy task for industry. So if you think of the industry, any industry, if you think of any industry, you will always see that all those, whether it is an automobile industry or a steel industry or a metallic industry or any kind of the manufacturing industry, you will find that most of the industry is going to generate a lot of wastewater. And certainly it will depend from one industry to other industry, the amount of the water which gets generated. So the question becomes how they are going to dispose. And that is where the problem comes, when they are not able to dispose in the right way, and that is what it comes to the contamination problem, either to the river or to the groundwater. So we will confine in the lecture here mostly to the groundwater, but on the periphery for basic understanding, you can see here that it can also contaminate the rivers or the lakes. So there has been an increasing concern regarding the water pollution resulting from municipal sewage and industrial effluent. See here in the second bullet, I am bringing the municipal corporation or the municipal sewage or industrial effluents. Why I'm saying you here? Because the municipal, the wastewater also has a large potential to contaminate. So many times what do we observe, the industrial disposal or industrial units will blame that has resulted because of the inefficient, the functioning of the treatment plants by the municipal corporations, and they are the main culprit, not us. So that also happened. And since when you take a sample from the groundwater and when you analyze that in environmental lab, you simply get the concentration of the chemical species. It doesn't tell you that this concentration has come from which source, whether industry or the municipal. So you have to do the analysis, and that is what we are going to study right now here, that what could be the mathematical way of investigating that who is the culprit. If you see the third bullet here, the water pollution problems are encompassing both river and groundwater and vary significantly in nature, complexity, dimension, and severity, as all of you know. The many rivers as well as groundwater are getting polluted from untreated or partially treated wastewater and leachate that emanate from landfill, or they find some conveyance from the industrial disposal to join rivers or streams or the groundwater for the contamination. So the question, that is where in the last bullet, if you see, the question comes, how could you put the blame on a particular event or industry for groundwater contamination? And if you are putting that blame, then what is the reliability? So what is the reliability associated with your statement that this is the source or this has really caused the pollution problem? So that is what the last bullet becomes important in that sense. Yeah. If you look at the sources, as you know, there could be multiple sources. As I said, you may have municipal sources and the causes. You may have industrial sources, the agricultural sources, or there could be many other sources. That is whatever is not under coming in the municipal, industrial, agriculture, you just club under the fourth group, miscellaneous sources. In the industry, as I said, it is going to depend upon what type of the industry you are having. And as you know, especially when you talk about the groundwater contamination, all the first three, what you are seeing here, the listed, all these three sources, the first municipal, the industrial and agriculture, all three are the biggest, the contributor to the pollution. Because here also you see in the industry, you'll be observing the effluent treatment plants are not up to that mark, or the way they are disposing the wastewater through the conveyance system. And if that had, you can say, the unlined drains or a natural drain, if that is being disposed there, certainly the way it travels during the course of this travel, it will go on contaminating the groundwater resources. The municipal, the source is also similar to that, when the sewage goes and it doesn't reach to the treatment plant, or it gets reached only partially, then during the conveyance, you will be observing that somewhere these wastewater are getting, soaked or they leached out, or you can say they're getting infiltrated into the groundwater and finally joining to the groundwater table to contaminate. The agricultural sources as primarily, as you know, because of the pesticides or the or any other kind of the chemicals, whatever you make use of for the agricultural productivity, the excess amount, that is what goes or leached out to the groundwater system to join. And mostly what you will observe that all these three sources are going to have a different nature of the contaminant. Like suppose if I say that if you take a sample of groundwater and do the analysis in a lab, and if you find a high nitrate certainly your doubt may go towards the municipal sources. That there may be somewhere the sewage water is getting, the leaked, and it is joining to the groundwater table, and that's why it is giving you the high nitrate. But the agricultural sources could be the another region which can give you the high nitrate also. But whenever you have the industry, certainly in most of the industrial effluents you are going to have a high metallic content. So the mostly if you find the metals, whether it is a cadmium, chromium, or any other, you are going to pinpoint that may be because of the industry. But since now there are many industry, then you have to see which industry is going to release such type of the contaminant, and how the pathway from the disposal from the industry to the groundwater it has taken place, and it has gone there, and then you are finding the concentration in the groundwater. So that investigation for the complete pathway between the source and of the contamination and the place where it is being contaminated, you have to investigate. So that is why it becomes an important that what are the sources of the contamination, likely contamination in a particular area, and the nature of the contaminants can help you, to pinpoint or to direct your investigation in the right direction. That you, when you are looking for some contaminant, and what could be the source of the contaminant, and that is how we do. Now, when you talk about the industry, then certainly, as I said, depending upon the industry, your composition of the wastewater is going to be different. So when composition is different, certainly the groundwater contamination which will result because of this is going to be different. So you need to first of all know what is the chemical composition of the wastewater, and that is what I'm putting here as a wastewater characterization in the first bullet. So you have to characterize the wastewater. That means you try to determine what are the chemical species which are present in the wastewater. If it is being disposed of after the treatment, whatever the level of the treatment, whether first level or primary or secondary or tertiary. So after the all treatment procedure, when it is being disposed, we need to know what is going to be the composition of that wastewater. And then when it is disposed, what is the loadings? The loading, when I say, it means here the both hydraulic loading and the mass loading. Hydraulic loading means how much liters, per second we are talking about, or how much meter cube per second you are going to release. So that means that tells you the volumetric quantity of the discharge which is being disposed, the wastewater, and then where it is being disposed. Then the mass loading is basically more related to that what are the chemical species present in that wastewater, and that is what it tells you how much mass of a particular contaminant is being loaded on a particular area because of this disposal to land or to the river. So the wastewater disposal, as you know, the many time people do like water disposal goes to the rivers or lakes or the ponds or the groundwater body. When it goes to the land disposal or subsurface disposal, certainly these two easily migrate to the groundwater, causing the groundwater contamination. And then, of course, if you talk about the pollution control guidelines we already have in terms of the BOD or COD or TDS, or if you call SAR, the sodium absorption ratio, or the salinity, alkalinity, or the boron or toxicity. So there are different standards already available that what could be the standards for disposing the water either to a river, or either to a water body, or on a land. Because when it disposed on the land, certainly it is going to contaminate first of all the soil and then slowly to the groundwater system. When it goes to a water body, certainly it contaminates the water body directly, and then surface water body directly. And then if you have the connectivity between the groundwater and the water body, either you are having a river or a lake, in both cases you can have the hydraulic connectivity between groundwater and the surface water body. And then in that case, you can have exchange of the flow of the chemical, and that can also contaminate the groundwater system. So that's why these the points became important when you are trying to analyze. See here, the scenario what we have in Indian setup for the wastewater that lead to the pollution. So in general, if you see the wastewater generation, this generation, depending upon the city, the generation is going to be different. And as you see here in the first case here, this is something, the wastewater is being generated from the class 1 city, and the another one for the class 2. The city for class 1 and class 2, that depends upon, you see here, on the population. That is how the classification of city is done. So suddenly you see here, there is a big gap between this upper and the lower portion. That means you see there is a big difference between the wastewater generation from the first or the second type of the cities. But if you look at the treatment side, so what you see, there is a treatment even in the class 1 cities. You have only 24% of the wastewater which is being treated, only 24%. So think of the remaining 76% remains untreated. And the situation is so bad in the lower class cities or class 2 cities, which are less populated, that around 96% is basically remain untreated. So only very meager amount, only 4% is treated. So what you see, this untreated or partially treated the wastewater, certainly that is going to be disposed in some means, and the way it is disposed, it will find some conveyance through a natural drain or through an online drain, which will allow the percolation to the groundwater. Or suddenly, when the percolation takes place from the surface to the soil, then slowly with the time it will go to the groundwater and it will contaminate, because all the contaminants which are migrating from the surface to the surface are not going to be attenuated by the soil media or the aquifer media. And that is why that becomes a problem, and certainly some of the wastewater, the partially or treated wastewater join rivers also. There's just one slide I'm showing you about the Yamuna river water. As you know, if you see the left slide, you can see it here. This is something, the river, condition of the river in the beginning where it originates. So that is here near Yamunotri, you see here. So you can, just by visualization, you can think of the water is very clean here. But think of what happens when it comes to Delhi. So in Delhi stretch, this is the photograph you can see below here. And so without doing any sampling also, you can simply say this has got contaminated. And certainly that is why I have put a question mark here, whether this river is a living or a dying, because it cannot go on sustaining more load, and certainly the quality is going to get deteriorated. So if you talk in terms of the scientific, the parameters, the situation becomes like this. So if you see the BOD, variation of the BOD along the river course, so what you can see here, except here itself, you see here, except before this point, when you have only a small around 5 milligram per liter of BOD, but all along the river course, you see here, this is showing a high value. So that means a high BOD you are observing in the all along the river course. You see here, all along the river course from 0 to the 10 kilometer from the point. This the 0 point is basically the Wazirabad barrage. So from the Wazirabad barrage, this distance has been measured. So you can see 10 kilometer downstream, all are getting high value of the BOD. Similarly, if you see the DO level, then you can see it here, except near the 0 point, that is your Wazirabad barrage. So upstream of the Wazirabad, you have around 6 milligram per liter, but all remaining points, if you see along the river, your DO level is very close to zero. So it means you are more or less in the anaerobic condition. So you can think of what is the state of the affair of the river. And that's why I put in the last, the slide, and I called whether it is a living or dying, because the river should have at least the 5 milligram per liter of DO, but you are getting more or less close to zero. So no even aquatic life can survive, and certainly leave the question of whether it is potable or not. Certainly it is not potable because it is in so bad a state of the condition. Now, if this is the situation that the quality has already got degraded so much, even though if you add a small amount of the water there with even a BOD of, let us say, 10 milligram per liter or 5 milligram per liter, it is going to create further negative problem only. So that means it is going to further degrade because it is already in a bad state. So it doesn't have its own capacity to purify. So think of when we call this self purification of the rivers, that capacity the river has already lost, and that's why it is something like a dying. And think of the all Yamuna floodplain, which are, you can all along the river course, the floodplain, whatever you have during the monsoon, when that gets recharged, and that water, goes to the groundwater, because through the recharge during the monsoon, a lot of water will go and replenish the groundwater system. So when it gets replenished during the monsoon season, it is not only raising the water level in the groundwater, but also it is giving you the fluxes of the contaminant which is coming from the surface water or the river. So that means their exchange of the contaminant from the surface water body to the groundwater body is taking place. So in the surface, you are getting the pollutant from the industry, and that pollutant is getting transferred to the groundwater through the connectivity of your river and the groundwater here, or the aquifer here. So there could be a situation of this kind also, but not necessarily the everywhere you'll find this situation. Somewhere you will find the groundwater contamination stand alone because of the industry rather than having any connectivity with the river. So most of the pollutants, if you see, you can find in the groundwater nowadays all type of the contaminant. So there was a time when there was a myth that whatever you take from a hand pump or a tube well, that is going to be clean. But that myth is not true today, because you can find all sort of the substances there. So you may have physical substances, inorganic, chemicals, organic, certainly the metals. Metals are, you can find at many places. You may have even the biological contaminant, but certainly in the upper layer, not in the layer of 100 meter or 150 meter. In the upper layer of the aquifers, maybe around 30 meter or 40 meter. And of course, radiological contaminants you can find because of the some industry or some nuclear power plant. You can find at some places some radioactive contaminant also. So if you think of the groundwater in general, if you talk about the dissolved constituents, because most of the time when we analyze in groundwater, you will find that the contaminants are dissolved. So you will be taking the sample, you can analyze what kind of the chemical species are there. But there could be some situation where the contaminant are not dissolved in water, and that is something, they may be in aqueous phase, but they are not dissolvable in water. So they will be in different phase, and so that is something we call like a non-aqueous phase liquid, NaPl, and then we have to deal with those kind of the substances separately. So in general, as I said, as a background in groundwater, even though if there is no contamination, you will find some chemical species and concentration of some chemical species. So in general, depending upon the concentration level, we say that what are the major constituents or secondary, minor, or trace. So this is what you see here, the ranges. These are something, just a typical range I have given you, just to tell you that in a groundwater, you may get a situation like this. Like if you find a constituent of the order of 1 to 1000 milligram, per liter or ppm. Basically, they are the major constituents and they are of concern. And mostly you'll find of this order for this kind of the chemical concentration. So you may have sodium ion, calcium, magnesium, bicarbonate, sulfate, chloride, or the silica. Like secondary, I'm talking about, you see the iron, fluoride, we are talking about secondary, and then you may have here uh, around 0.01 to 10 ppm. The nitrate also, the boron also. The metals in general, they are the minor constituents. As you see here, all kind of the metal, cadmium, chromium, copper, cobalt, nickel, all you can find in groundwater. But in certain situation, in some specific regions, they may not be a minor, that may be major. It's like here, you see here the arsenic, and as you know, the arsenic is a contaminant which you can find in large quantity in West Bengal or Andhra or in part of Bihar, and so if you have some of the contamination or some of the metals in a specific area, then you may have to see because of what. So, as I said, there could be some industry because of that you will be having high content of, especially let us say the chromium or the copper or cobalt. So these are the metals which are going to be associated with a specific industry, and so you may be having some of the contamination because of those industry, and you'll find high values of these constituents. The trace, certainly they are going to be very small, very in quantity. But in general, if you say clubbing the all ions or cations, whatever we call, and that is many times we express in terms of the TDS. And in terms of the TDS, if you just try to see, we say that, okay, we can call it fresh water if you have less than 1000 ppm. We call brackish groundwater if you have in the range of 1000 to 10,000 ppm. You can call saline if you have around 10,000 to 100,000, and then certainly more than 100,000 ppm if you have, that is going to be the brine solution. And as you know, there are many pockets in India which are the brackish water, especially in western UP, the Haryana and Rajasthan, and there are many areas which are saline, like as I said, that you can find also the saline water in Haryana and western UP, but all coastal areas are going to have saline water. So these are the constituents which are important for under the chain reactions breaking from one to the other the element. So those are the processes one have to consider when you talk about power plant or some other sources. Now, coming to when you try to study or try to see that how the contamination is taking place in a groundwater because of some industry or some processes or some event, then you can see it here for your understanding that let us say if I put a drop, so this is something like you can see a drop I have put of contaminant in a river or in a water body which is moving. So think of a water body just like a river, or in a laboratory. Suppose you are having a flume. So in the flume, if you drop a one drop of the contaminant here, what you will find because of the motion, because of the fluid motion, and let us say there is a uniform flow and the velocity is u here, here is also u. So there is a uniform flow and that velocity is u. So because of this velocity, this contaminant will travel from here to here, as you see it here. But with the time, as you see, this has become larger in size. Again, it has traveled because of the motion from here to here, but it has become further larger. So what happens with the time, a small drop of the contaminant will go on spreading in a larger area, and it is going to contaminate a larger area. And that is why you see with the time the whole area or the whole thing becomes contaminated. But if you compare with the groundwater contamination, you'll find a difference here. So if you have a groundwater and if you maintain the same velocity u as a uniform velocity, you'll observe a distinction here. The distinction, what you'll observe, that here also the contaminant drop which you have seen, that gets enlarged. But enlarged here is more in the longitudinal direction, if you see, more in the longitudinal direction, and you have less in the transverse direction. So there is a difference here in comparison to what you see in a channel or in a river or in a flow. So in groundwater, the spreading of the contaminant is going to be more along the flow and less along the transverse. Similarly, with the time when it gets advanced, you have further enlargement and more in the longitudinal direction here and the less in the transverse direction. So this kind of the characteristics you'll observe, and that has to be, the conceptualized when you try to make a mathematical model for understanding or investigating the movement of the contaminant. And that is how we say that you have to track down the plume and how that plume is moving with the time. Sometimes this plume, like let us say this plume is here, maybe it gets, it gets translated, but sometimes it may not get translated in this fashion. Maybe you have contours like this, or you may have enlargement like this. So that means at the beginning, you remain with the same concentration. So that means in the beginning, you remain a point here, and from here, you get a spreading like this. You get a spreading like this with the time. So you see how the plumes are moving. So this may be at, let us say, at T1. This may be at, the T2. This may be situation at T3. And let us say this situation is at T4 here. So certainly this is a transient phenomena, and you can observe that the plumes are having of this shape, they are enlarging with the time. So that is how you have to see which kind of the source might have resulted this kind of the contamination. And there you have to link up this plume movement with the waste, the loadings of the pollutant. You remember I was talking about when wastewater content, the characterization and the wastewater loading. So here, what could be the pollutant loading, and because that pollutant loading, how the plumes are behaving with the time. That can give you a kind of the cause and effect relationship, and it can help you that really this kind of the response may result of due to if you have a pollutant loading of this particular industry and of this kind. So that is how we go on analyzing in the inverse way by linking the plume behavior or the plume movement with the type of the pollutant loading which can result from a particular industry. Okay, so when you do the analysis mathematically, certainly the different processes we take, and the different processes we have the transport mechanism we can have, and that we call like advection, dispersion, diffusion. These three processes, if you see, these three processes are going to be there for any type of the contaminant you talk about, resulting from any industry, because these three processes will be there, and they'll be mostly guided by, water velocity and what kind of the porous configuration you have. So that's why the advection is primarily because of the bulk motion of the groundwater. The diffusion is primarily because of the concentration gradient, whatever you have. So that means at the point where the waste or the pollutant is being disposed, or there is a source, polluting source, and then the place where it is a fresh, then you have a high concentration gradient. Because of this concentration gradient, the contaminant will move, and that is what we call like a diffusion. Dispersion comes primarily because of the velocity variation. So you have the pores, and then the pores is going to have different diameter or different sizes at different places. So the flow through the pores is going to be different at different point, and that variation results in dispersion of the some of the contaminant, and that is what we call mechanical dispersion or simple dispersion. These are the other phenomena, as you see here, the sorption. This is primarily because of the nature between the chemicals present in the as a contaminant and the nature of the minerals present in the soil or the aquifer media. So that is the interaction between these two. Like some of the contaminant may get absorbed by the clay particle or aquifer media. So that means those contaminants will be removed by that material. So that is something we can call like a sorption. But somewhere it can happen in reverse way also, that the soil or the rock media or the aquifer media is having some of the contaminant, but because of that thermodynamic conditions, whatever is prevailing there, those contaminants are being released into the water. So that is being dissolved. So that becomes a desorption there. So we have both process here, absorption and desorption can take place simultaneously depending upon the concentration of the chemical species in water and the concentration of those chemical species in the media, through which the water is passing. The decay is something depending upon the substance, whether it is a biodegradable substance or radioactive decay material. You can consider these processes. Other process, as you see here, the physical, natural, or anthropogenic activity. That is, whatever the other activities is done, it may not be directly with the pollution, but if that changes the velocity, then it also changes the pollution pattern. Because whenever the velocity gets influenced or the velocity gets modified, your concentration distribution also gets modified. So that's why all activity which changes the flow profile or flow vectors in the area are liable to also give you a migration of the contaminant. There could be the other processes, that is what is written here as a chemical reaction or something here, hydrolysis or volatilization and biotransformation. It all depends upon the nature of the contaminant. Then only these processes are going to take place. Or any chemical reaction, just like as you see the chemical reactions in the environmental life, if you do having to kind of the reactants and products, something like that also can happen in the aquifer media because of the contaminant which join, and those chemical reactions also can be considered. Then we have the transport in aquifers with a pronounced bimodal permeability distribution. This is especially true when we talk about the pollution problems in the hard rock area. So if there is an industry or there is anything located in the industrial, in the hard rock area, then there the porosity is not of one kind. That is what we call a dual porosity model, that we have to define primary and secondary porosity, and then we have to think how the contaminant will migrate through these pores. So the model description becomes different here. The other geochemical processes which may be relevant here, as I said, it could be a decay. The adsorption, desorption is primarily, as I said, it could be because of the interaction between the ions present in water and present in the media. The reactions could involve dissolution and precipitation of some of the substances. There could be acidification, mineralization, or the natural weathering or leaching, or any kind of the complex reaction. That is what we call like a complexation procedure. So one has to see, first of all, what are the sources which can result because of some industry or some process or some event, and really what are the processes which can happen, and then you have to make a analysis for that, or make a mathematical model to simulate that kind of the process to know the effect or distribution. So when we go for developing a mathematical model to understand this kind of the phenomena or to analyze scientifically, we primarily define the contaminant fluxes. So the contaminant fluxes could be like here, as you see, it could be the advective flux, which is primarily because of the bulk motion of groundwater. Then could be a diffusive flux, which is the spreading of the contaminant because of the concentration gradient. So that tells you the random movement of the molecules, the contaminant molecules in a fluid. And then there is a dispersive flux that is happening because of the the variation in the velocity or variation in the pores at the macroscopic level. And that is where, as I said, the pore configuration varies, so velocity also varies, and that is going to depend upon the pore size configuration. So with this, the basic understanding, we define the fluxes in a mathematical form like this. You see here the advective flux, the first one. This is product of the velocity and the concentration. The diffusive flux we define like this. So you have a change in concentration gradient here, and this is you have molecular diffusion. So that dd is something here, the molecular diffusion. I have put it here dd star, which indicates the molecular diffusion in the porous media. The ij is in a tensor notation to tell you that in case of the 2-dimensional or 3-dimension, this is going to behave like a matrix. So you will be having all components, so something like this. Let us say here dd. So ij means if there is a 3-dimensional, if I say, then there will be here the unit of xx. Then there will be here dd, xy, just like a tensor, and this is dd, here the xz. So all 3 dimensions will come here. So you will be having 9 components here. So similarly, this side here, you are going to have the dd yx, dd yy, dd yz, and then here the third is going to be your dd zx, then dd here zy, and then here dd zz. Sorry. So like that, you will be having the 9 components here. So this is what it tells you. The dispersive flux we define like here. So this is going to be the dispersion here, similar to this dd. Here, this is your mechanical dispersion, and you have the concentration gradient. So if you see a breakthrough, the breakthrough will look like this. So if there is no dispersion and diffusion, then this if you plot relative concentration versus time, then it should have of this kind, very sharp interface, and then it should be like this. But because of dispersion or diffusion, what you see, some of the contaminant particles are moving faster, and that's why, and some of the contaminant particles are moving slower, and that's why you have of a smear type of the curve here. So that's why you see, because of this dispersion and diffusion, the concentration breakthrough is going to be something of this kind rather than a sharp interface. So this is how, what is the basics I have just illustrated you for such kind of the analysis. I'll give you, some of the, I'll talk about some kind of the mathematical model in the 1-dimensional, then we'll go to the 2-dimensional, 3-dimension. So after 1 dimension, I will have a pause, and then I will have some discussion with you. Then I'll give you some case study so that you can have a better picture of how it looks like after the analysis. So I'll give you some case studies after a few slides. So when you talk about the 1D, the contaminant transport model, then let us think of, we have uniform velocity, the homogeneous aquifer, advection, dispersion, diffusion you have. This is the basic assumption we are making for a 1-dimensional model. and then there is no source or sink term here. So there is no source or sink, and of course we consider hydrodynamic dispersion, which is the sum of both this dispersion and diffusion. And then of course, as I said, the longitudinal and transverse dispersion is going to be there, because in the groundwater, longitudinal dispersion is going to be more and less in the transverse direction. So the one-dimensional containment transport model something will look like this. So the governing equation will be this: the change in the concentration here, del C upon del T, if you see it here. So this is the concentration change of any chemical species. So here C could be nitrate, could be sulfate, could be chloride, any chemical species. This is the velocity here, the velocity of groundwater. This is a change in the concentration gradient along the X. This is the hydrodynamic dispersion, DH, which can be a sum of both mechanical dispersion, D, and plus molecular diffusion, DD star. And then your second order derivative here, del 2C upon del X square. And as I said, the longitudinal dispersion is your here product of alpha L. This is the dispersivity multiplied by the groundwater velocity. Similarly, here transverse dispersivity, we take the transverse dispersivity multiplied by the V velocity. So you can approximate like this. So as you see, when the velocity changes, your longitudinal transverse dispersion is going to be different. When dispersion changes, certainly the change in the concentration, when you try to find out here, like C, so C is a function of here, C is a function of X and T in the one dimension. So this is the X. So that means because of any contaminant which are coming because of some source can migrate to a place. So if you solve this particular equation, you can get the concentration at any value of X and at any time T in the one dimension. Similarly, you can have in real life two-dimensional, three-dimensional problem here. And then you can know what is going to be the concentration. And then you can see whether this is really polluting or not polluting, depending upon what is the limitation for drinking water or for irrigation purpose or for industrial use. So or this industry has caused any contamination or not, whether this is giving you toxicity level or not. Those kind of scenario you can see once you know what is going to be the concentration at a particular point and at a particular time. So I'm just talking about a one-dimensional problem. Think of that you have a contaminant which is moving in the one dimension in the groundwater. So just like a sand column, think of that you have a sand column which is one dimensional. So and then you have injected some contaminant. So how that is going to spread? So that is what it says here. Initially, you don't have any contamination, but you have injected some contaminant, and that is going to move from one point from where you have injected to the downstream wherever it can propagate. So let us consider transport of a dissolved contaminant here in a porous column of sand or soil, which is initially free from any contaminant. So initially there is no contamination, so there is no chemical species present here. If a contaminated water, let us say that enters to this porous column or porous medium at a particular point, so we are interested to know how this concentration of the contaminant changes within the column at various time and space. What is going to be the value at a different point and at different time? And that is how you can make a analytical model, and then you can solve and you can know that if a contaminant is coming because of any industry or because of any other process at a particular point, how that is going to migrate. So you can, if you invert, that can give you the tracking of the place from where the contaminant has come. So this is the based on the analytical solution given by Ogata and Bang. So there are some assumptions here that is I have highlighted that let's think of one dimensional flow. The porous medium is semi-infinite here, so that from x equal to 0 to infinity, as you see here, so that is infinite. Initially, there is no contamination, so initially it is free from contamination, and then all of a sudden you have some concentration of the contaminant So there is at the inflow end at x equal to 0, you have got some contamination at time t equal to 0. Now you can see how this contaminant is moving. What is going to be the concentration of this contaminant at a particular time at a particular point? And think of this is a continuous contaminant. So that means there may be some industry which is continuously releasing some of the contaminant at a particular point. And that is why it is a continuous source. So because of this continuous source, the analytical solution we get from here. So again, this is same equation will hold true. This advection dispersion equation we call because of the one dimensional. So we put the initial condition and boundary condition. And as you know, the initial condition was C is equal to 0. So C was 0 at t equal to 0. That was your initial condition. And boundary condition was that you have a C naught, let us say, at x equal to 0 for all the time t. Now you're interested to know what is going to be the value of C because of this contaminant at different x and time. So solution can be given for this as an analytical model. This is the solution here. One can estimate. So this is the concentration of the contaminant which has been injected. So you can know from here, this is the concentration at any x at any time t. You can see here. So this is a complementary function. This is known as the complementary error function, ERFC. X is your distance where you want to determine. V is velocity. T is a time. DHL is your hydrodynamic dispersion. This is the exponential function. XB I have explained you. DHL is hydrodynamic dispersion longitudinal. This is also a complementary error function. And these are, I have already explained these terms. And this hydrodynamic dispersion, you can estimate from this expression, DHL, and that DHL is going to be here, alpha L, as you see here, alpha L into V. This is your longitudinal dispersivity into velocity plus your molecular diffusion. So here, if a pollutant has been injected, C0, which may have concentration, let us say 2000 milligram per liter. So let us say at this point it is being injected. So you can know what is the value here. Let us see if I'm interested. So you can know what is the distance here, X, and what time after 1 year, 2 year, 5 year. You can always put the value of X here, T here. The velocity you have to determine what is the groundwater velocity, and based on that, what is your hydrodynamic dispersion also. Then you plug here, get the value of the complementary error function here, get the value of exponential function, get the complementary error function, put it here. You can know what is the value of C here. So this complementary error function, you can find out in any standard engineering mathematics books. In a tabular form, you can have this value because you cannot get the integration analytically. So this is defined like this. The error function we define. So this is the error function here. We define by 2 by root pi 0 to infinity. Sorry, 0 to x e to the power minus alpha square and d alpha. Similarly, complementary error function in a similar way we can define here, but now the limit is from x to infinity here. So the property what you have that if you add this complementary error function or error function, that makes equal to 1. So if you have to get the complementary error function, you can simply subtract from 1 the value of this error function. In any standard, the engineering mathematics books, or even in the most of the programs available on the computer, they can give you the values for this error function. So if you are able to know the error function, so you can get the value of the complementary error function by this expression, and then you can go back here for calculating the first term and the second term here. Plugging this, you can get the value of this C, and then you can know what is the concentration. So this is how the analytical model is used. But certainly now, as I said, in a real life, you will be involving complex problem. So you'll be having the 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional problem. So I will discuss now some case studies where you will be having 2 and 3-dimensional problem. So with this basic background or basic foundation on this particular groundwater contamination topic for the analysis, I will just keep a pause for a few minutes to have some interaction with you. That do you have any query right now? Yes, so anybody is having any query at this stage? If you have any query, you can ask, please. Or we can continue. Yes, anybody is having any query at this stage? No, it doesn't appear there is any query at this stage, so we can continue now. Okay. So in a real life, when you have 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional problem, you're going to primarily involve equation of this kind. You see here, this is in the tensor notation. You have here the K is hydraulic conductivity, H is the hydraulic head, this SS is your storage coefficient, this is small q is indicating the pumping per unit area from a particular grid or a particular location. This delta is a Dirac delta function. So when x becomes xw and y becomes yw, then that means this becomes 0, this becomes 0. So at this point, the value of this Dirac delta function is 1. Otherwise, it becomes 0. It helps you to simulate in a particular area whether you have a tube well or not. If you have a groundwater pumping from a particular area, then the value of Dirac delta function for that grid is going to be equal to 1. Otherwise, this will take the value of 0. That is how we try to incorporate source and sink term. So this is how you can think. So there is a sink term here for the contamination. There is another source or sink term. You can say here that if there is a recharge. So this is pumping, P for pumping. Substance R here is for recharging. So here also you have a Dirac delta function. So these two together help you to simulate source and sink term in the groundwater. So this is for the flow. For the spreading of the contaminant, you are going to involve this equation. So this is, you see here, C is the concentration of any chemical species, B is the thickness of the aquifer, T is the time, and this DH, as I said, this is the hydrodynamic dispersion here, DHIJ. So this is the, you see, this is your hydrodynamic dispersion, and this is your velocity. So this term is basically advection. This term is basically your dispersion and diffusion. And this is the term which are source or sink. So this is for the pumping. So if you are pumping water, certainly some of the contaminant also will go out. So same concentration is going to out. But if you are recharging, so the recharging water may have a different concentration. That's why you have a different notation here, CR. The N is the porosity of the aquifer. So primarily, you are going to involve these two set of equations. This is for flow and this is for the contaminant spreading. These two set of equations you are going to involve in case of 2 and 3 dimension. So either you can develop your own program to solve numerically because you cannot solve analytically here. So generally we go for a numerical model, and the numerical model, these partial differential equations are solved by the algebraic equation. So we solve here for a set of, the input, and then you need to have a computer code or a computer program. Either you have to develop your own or you can make use of the software, commercially available software. I'll just give you some of the name also of the commercial software. And so this is going to solve for a specified set of points. You'll be getting the solution, and then you'll be generalizing or you'll be trying to get the contour from these specific point result. This is another for the after. Oh, sorry, this is, I'm going back. Yeah, this. So in a nutshell, we can come out with this observation that there are no major streams or rivers or lake nearby. Uh, there is a, in case of alternative 1 and 3, the chances of migration of the contaminant to Vuria Nala and Badkar Lake increase in long term if no measures are taken. And as I see, the flow directions get divided along the ridge line. So it reveals both sides, like Haryana and Delhi. We have the chances, or it is susceptible to groundwater pollution, which are emanating from here in case of the alternative 3. Then this also reveals you that when the plumes are growing in size, and with the time, they have the more dispersion towards the Haryana side for alternative 1, whereas it is more towards Delhi side in Chhatarpur direct area for alternative 2. So you see, so different alternatives give you a different kind of the observation. The another thing what we observe that when all pits start releasing the contaminant here, so instead of 10 and 12, if only 2 and 6 are not here, so it is going to take within 10 years, and so the pollution problem may not aggravate in a multiplicative way. So that means you may have to take measures in sequence that so that the all pits don't start releasing the contaminant simultaneously. And the inhabitant area, as it was identified, like Sanjay Nagar, Balbir Nagar, Indra Nagar, they are the more vulnerable areas, and they are having more chances of getting their groundwater contaminated here. And more or less, it is not so fast, and so it is going to take around 20 years for contaminating in the major areas of groundwater in South Delhi or adjoining area of Haryana. So the time span we get that up to what time it is going to be the more vulnerable. So this was on that. Now I'm giving you the another couple of slides for an industrial unit where we looked for whether it has resulted of any groundwater contamination or not because of this plant. So this plant is located in Ghaziabad, and you can see here this plant, this industrial area is having the two kind of the industry. One is the distillery unit, here, sorry, and there is another, the sugar. So this have the distillery unit and then the sugar unit. So what we do here to have a compliance of the zero discharge, that there should not be any discharge of liquid discharge from industrial unit to any water body. So what has been done that after the treatment of the up to the third level of the treatment, so there is a primary, secondary, and tertiary level of the treatment. So the water or the effluent which is coming from the distillery plant, that is put in here in the lagoon. So there is a lagoon constructed here, as you see here, this lagoon. So in this lagoon, there is a detention of water. So the effluent, the partially treated effluent is detained here for some time. And then from the sugar industry, the molasses which come out, that is disposed here. So you see, this is the open area below which there is a geosynthetic liner. That is of the natural material. It has been made so that there should not be any leaching from here. So molasses are spread here, and from this detention tank, which contains the industrial effluent, partially treated effluent, that is used in this molasses here to convert this molasses into the compost. And this compost is basically sold into the market. And so the industry doesn't allow any water to get disposed in a river or any land. So that means they comply zero discharge. So that is ZLD plant. You can say the ZLD plant, and in the compliance of the pollution regulation nowadays. But now the question remains here that because of this lagoon and because of this, the compost plant, do you have any contaminant which migrates and contaminates adjoining groundwater? So that is what we investigated. So we put the piezometers all around the this detention tank or oxidation pond, you can say, and all along here the biocompost yard. And from here, then at certain distances from here, we went in the all radial direction from this source. So we went along this direction also. But primarily, we noticed that we try to see where is the flow direction. So one can go all along, but primarily the flow direction is along these three. So this direction, this, and this direction. There is no movement along this direction, I can say. So I can cross it here. There is no flow direction in this. So, but in these three directions, you have flow, and the flow is dominant in these three directions. So we tried to investigate the migration of contaminant if anything happened, and then took out the sample from there, and that water through the tubewell, it is utilized for the irrigation. So there is a we field channel was created, and then the samples were measured even here for the analysis. So that is what I said, putting piezometers for groundwater level monitoring here, then the groundwater sampling from locations around industrial unit, then you determine the chemical concentration here in groundwater, and then you try to find out the cause and effect analysis through mathematical model. As just now we discussed, that whether those sample which you have taken from away from those industrial places have really some contaminant which are migrated from those industry or not. So that you make some plausible hypothesis here, and then do the hypothesis testing, and then based on that analysis from the mathematical model, you can interpret and verify that really that has caused contamination or not here. So like here in this particular case, we could find that the industry was not really responsible for contaminating groundwater nearby area, and there is no damage or there is no effect on the crop here in this area because of any pollution level. So with this, I would like to conclude today that the use of mathematical models is encouraging to address the increasing complex groundwater quality problems, and they are very helpful in the forensic analysis of groundwater contamination in real life scenario. The mathematical models can be effectively utilized to address or to analyze the cause and effect relationship, to trace the sources or the activities responsible for groundwater contamination. One can have the tracking of the evolution of plumes with the time that help in the ascertaining the aggravating factors or remediation program for groundwater contamination or restoration. The groundwater quality models can be effectively utilized, for understanding the groundwater contamination or evolving management strategies, or evaluating the potential impact of any engineering activity, or to carry out the EIA, that is the environmental impact assessment. So numerical models are really useful for such kind of the analysis, and that help you in the decision making for appropriate planning, to evolve some mitigating measures, and so that you can effectively manage your groundwater resources, and you can take measures for protecting your groundwater from the contamination resulting from industries or any other kind of the sources. So I think with this, I would like to thank you, and I think we still have some time. I thought that I have completed well in time, so that we have time for discussion. So here I would like to stop my lecture. So thank you very much, and I'll be happy now to have interactive session with you to answer your any kind of the queries you have. Yes, please. So you're welcome now to have any question. Thank you for hearing. Yes, anybody is having any question?
Uh, so this
Any
first,
query? Yes, please.
yeah, first case study, there are those points from where you have the contaminant, it will be just moving out. So we can put some kind of barriers. I mean, what is the depth of contaminant? Till what depth we can put some kind of lining material or barrier? And if you put it like this, then uh, that pollution will be contained. But then with time, will that be degrading? Can we just contain it there after in the same time span? What will be the quality? I mean, that contaminant which is there in those points, they will degrade. They will degrade to what with time? If we just contain it, migrate from there.
Yes, you see, in the first case, we have there is a groundwater table. So you can curtail by putting the some kind of the liner or doing some ground improvement. But as I have shown you in the first case, there is a the area of quartzite which have fractures. So that means if you have to make the the subsurface which doesn't allow any kind of the migration, you have to do the protection below the base and also on the side walls. So it becomes a costly affair because all
So it
along
will
all
be okay.
along
So
the side.
it's money
Yeah,
part. So due to
yes,
okay, so money part has to be invested. Okay.
yes, yes.
I just yeah, sort
But of course, if you do the lining all along the side walls and also the below the base, certainly it will not allow any contaminant to migrate. So it becomes a trade-off between how much expenditure you want to put for the um, barrier or the lining of the side walls and the base, or you want to allow some contaminant to migrate. So that is how the economics works. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for
Yeah.
answering.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, there is any other? I think one of the colleague has asked the software used here. I think the elaborate on mathematical modeling, like what software used and all. So let me tell you the first problem, the first case study where I have shown you there. We have made use of the GMS, that is the groundwater modeling system. So this is GMS is a software from the US that integrates your mod flow and MT3D, which have been developed by the US Geological Survey, but that have been customized as a product, a Windows-based product with a high GIS capability, so that you can do all inputting and the manipulation through the map work, and it is compatible with any other kind of the GIS software. So even if you do some processing for the input data in some GIS software like MapInfo or ArcInfo, you can the export those data into the GMS, and then you can analyze. So the solution whatever I have shown you, that is the outcome obtained from the GMS software. But there are many other software available. You can make use of any other, but GMS is the most commonly used in India. But GMS, when I say, that means GMS is a more customized product from one agency, but in the back, the real engine for this numerical solution is the mod flow and are the programs written in the Fortran by the US Geological Survey, and on top of that, the all customization work have been done, and then the product is now in the as a Windows based software. Okay. There is another chat box question. Also, can we make use of GIS in this kind? Yes, of course, you can make use of GIS here, and GIS can help you in many ways because it can help you directly giving the input data, like in terms of the boundary of the area, the input for the hydraulic conductivity, input for the pumping unit for the recharge. So all those input can be easily fed if you already have a GIS maps of different layers, and those input layers from the any kind of the GIS software. Let us say example ArcGIS, you can always import in the GMS and you can make use of. So your inputting data will be easier if you make use of GIS. Yes, so that can be done. Yeah, there is a question that does this contamination of groundwater in any way affects the water cycle at all? You see, the water cycle in some way it will get affected, but not in a highly quantitative way, I can tell you. But why I'm saying that in some way it can affect, because in the shallow region, when you have the shallow region, there will be evaporation from the soil. So there will be some kind of the exfiltration, especially during the non-monsoon time. So if you take the hydrological water balance, then there will be some exfiltration. And if the rainwater comes and that gets discharged, or that means that gets percolated through the fractures of the rock, then certainly that part of the water goes to the soil and a deep percolation to the groundwater. So that doesn't contribute to the runoff. So in that way, the hydrological cycle is going to be affected because it is going to reduce the runoff and it is going to increase your recharging. So in a true sense, you can say it affects, but not very explicitly as you see in the surface water. Yeah, any other question? Yes. Okay, there is a question. Please tell some free software, sir. Okay, I think freely available software, there are some demo version available for the mod flow. The older versions are freely available. So one can make use of the older versions of mod flow and MT3D. You have to do a little bit more, they put energy in making use of those models because they may not be so highly customized Windows-based software. But yes, you can make use of those older version as a freely available, but not the newer one because that is a proprietary item. They charge heavy amount. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, any other question, anybody?
So I think so we can conclude, sir.
Yes. I think I see there is no other query, so certainly we can conclude now.
Yes. So there are set of questions also, sir. I have one question.
Yes, please.
Sir, for subsurface flow, like just underneath of the surface of the earth. So how do we model it? Like, do we have any small scale like models to analyze the transport of contaminant from, say, the dumping site or landfill? If at all any spillage happens without lining, any landfill without lining is present, so how the transport we can analyze? So do we need the groundwater contamination modeling or any model you suggest? So how do we do?
You see, there is no barrier, there is no restriction whether you want to take a small size or a bigger size. Of course, bigger size can be taken very easily. There is no problem. Only thing, what we do when you are going for a bigger size problem, then you have to see how the groundwater level is varying, how the quality is varying. If they are varying very high, so identify those regions where they are varying very high. You have to make a smaller grid, finer grid. Where they are not varying very high, you can make a coarser grid. So that distinction you can make so that your computational burden goes down. Okay. And you can analyze a larger problem also by appropriately choosing the grid size. Secondly,
we have to identify hotspots, like.
Yes.
Okay.
So those can come from your if you have taken some sample from some points, and then you can analyze that in the lab, and then you just try to see a plot of those as a contours. So those can help you to identify which are the pockets which need a finer grid and which are the pockets which need a coarser grid. So that way you can plan for your modeling.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you. So which model, sir, do you suggest for? Like, is it any 1D or 2-dimensional model we can?
No, I would suggest always a 2-dimensional model,
right.
Because that is something where you can get real solution, and then those real solution will be very close to your the whatever you if you want to implement, it can be implemented with the desired accuracy or desired level of outcome. So one should go for the 2-dimensional problem. You don't have to go for 3-dimensional. 2-dimensional is sufficient enough to address most of the groundwater problems.
So before we, before we do analysis in the lab, in the field scale, so for modeling of this contaminant transport in the field scale, so can you suggest any method in the bench scale or lab scale? So which instrumentation we can do? So is it sufficient?
You see, in the lab scale, you can have a soil column study. So you can make a soil column, and on that you can do the study on a lab scale.
Right, sir.
So this, and then you can even simulate that column, the lab scale, through 1-dimensional model, so that you are able to have the confidence that your numerical model, 1-dimensional model, and your experimental setup are working fine. They are in sync. So that validation can be easily done by the analytical solutions.
So like tracer studies we can do.
Yes. Of course, just like tracer study.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I think there is one question here. What is the percentage reliability of analysis done in groundwater contamination? Is government taking any initiative in mitigation of contamination? If so, in what ways? Yes, reliability is very high. I think I'll tell you, if you talk about the US and Australia, they are highly using all the modeling results in the real implementation. So in India, use is less, certainly, because it requires a lot of expertise, and also by the people who are in the field for managing this, they may not be having that much the expertise available. They have to take the help from the academician or researchers, so that makes some kind of the bottlenecks. But in India also, it is in use for in certain area, like the groundwater board already have a national aquifer management mapping plan, and under that they have mapped the whole aquifer in India up to a larger extent, and they have recalibrated and estimated the parameters like transmissibility, storage coefficient, storageability, and in some of the areas they have also taken this initiative for the groundwater contamination problem. But they take generally to a problem which is burning of that region, like arsenic problem, like fluoride problem somewhere. So like that, or somewhere it has been reported by the the uranium problem in some parts of the Punjab. So they have gone for the extensive study there. So generally in quality, they go for extensive for a localized or a small area problem if that problem becomes pertinent in that region. So a specific demand driven base, they are doing quality studies. But for the flow or the mapping, they are doing on the whole India basis, an integrated manner.
So, okay, sir, thank you. I think with this we can stop maybe. And some of, I think, the participants are asking for the books to
suggest. I think books, maybe I can send you, you can have a contact me through email, and then I can give you some of the book names. But I can, right now, I can only say there are very good books by Jacob Beer Jacob Weir and Verujit. Weir and Verujit on groundwater. There is also a book by Fridge and Cherry. These are the books. And for numerical modeling, there is a book by the Pinder and Huekon. They have written a very good book on numerical modeling. And then the Schwarz. By Schwarz, you can get the most of the basics on the groundwater contamination. So the Schwarz and book by Fridge and Cherry, they are the very good book in for the contaminant hydrology. So, but still, if you are not able to get these books, you can always write to me. I can forward you the name of the books and the publication from where it gets published. Then you can purchase or you can have ebook from them. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And so with this, I think we can conclude. I think no more questions maybe because we are already out of time. So tomorrow again at 9 o'clock in the morning. So the session 7 will start. So for all the delegates, please try to stick to the time to attend. And I would like to say once more, thank you very much, Keshri sir, and for your valuable talk and also the very in detail explanation about our queries. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. So shall we end, sir?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. So I am ending the meeting. I think.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you. Stop recording. You can, this one.